Good afternoon. Here we have a large, bustling city, the capital of a country soon to become an empire. Looks harmless enough, doesn't it? But it has now been marred by the blood of thousands. The flames of revolution have swept through Paris, incinerating everything in their path. This square was where the revolution started. Notice the structure behind me and how insignificant it appears. What you see now is a small pile of rocks was once a large fortress, a medieval prison known as the Bastille. Under the control of the French government, the Bastille served as a symbol of the king's injustices. When those injustices reached their breaking point, the Bastille was the first to fall. 2 months before, in nearby Versailles, the French king had called together the Estates General for the first time since 1614 to address the nation's financial crisis. Irresponsible spendings on behalf of the crown and the assist of the infantile America during the Revolution had cost the country dearly. France was on the brink of bankruptcy, and the government needed money. Since government has no money of its own, heavy taxes must be placed on the people, and for France, that meant the Third Estate. Comprised of middle and peasant classes, the Third Estate made up 98% of the population, but had none of the wealth. And it was this poor majority that supplemented the wealthy minority by paying all of the nation's taxes. At the Estates General, the First and Second Estates, made up of clergy and nobility, respectively, voted to raise taxes on the Third Estate. Since each estate had but one vote, the minority was able to outweigh the majority. This forced the Third Estate to break off and form their own legislation, known as the National Assembly. This development enthralled the citizens of Paris, and they eagerly awaited news from Versailles. When news finally reached the people, it wasn't as good as they had hoped. The king, once more ignorant to the will of the people, had removed his director of finances, Jacques Necker. Necker was quite popular with the people, and his removal sparked an outrage. To rub salt further into the wound, military forces had been set up to keep Paris in check. It was as if they were begging for retaliation from the people. While the National Assembly worked towards political reform, the citizens of Paris made a reform of their own, in the form of revolution. The people needed guns and munitions, and there were plenty available at the Bastille. In a mob, they stormed the building, their numbers overwhelming the guards. They took control of the fortress with ease. Now armed with weapons, the citizens of Paris prepared for a counterattack by assembling barricades. The king and his forces backed down the next morning. The people took control of Paris, and the revolution was born. Shortly after the storming of the Bastille came the dismantling. Mobs of people tore the building down brick by brick, leaving only what you see there remaining. The museum was fortunate enough to have one of these bricks. Paris was soon to become the political center of France. In October 1789, a crowd of women invaded the palace in Versailles to protest bread prices. During this event, the royal family were forced to move to Paris, where they would remain until the end of their lives. It was also during this time that the French monarchy lost much of its power. In August 1789, the National Assembly abolished the centuries-old feudalistic system. 3 weeks later, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen was issued by the Assembly. The Declaration was a document that introduced equality and sovereignty among the French people. The Declaration of the Rights of Man was the first document in a long line of legislations, constitutions, and decrees over the course of revolution, but this would prove to be the one with the most staying power. This is because at its core, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen was a document proclaiming Enlightenment ideals. Enlightenment ideals were the hot topic of the 18th century as many states went through political reform. The ideas of liberty, equality, reason, secularism, and popular sovereignty were alive and well during this century as people began to question what their rights were and what power they had. The radical revolutionaries of France held these ideals dear. With the king now trapped with the people, an editorialist by the name of Jean-Paul Marat took advantage of the situation. In his newspaper, The Friend of the People, Marat became a voice in favor of the most radical of revolutionary ideas. He openly criticized moderate revolutionary leaders and warned the people to be on the lookout for counter-revolutionary activities. In late 1790, Marat came to have a viewpoint that the French monarchy needed to be abolished completely and that, by not doing so, the National Assembly was not doing its job. Marat was also an advocate for the execution of counter-revolutionaries. His political opponents regarded him as an enemy of France. He was assassinated in a medicinal bath in 1973 by a moderate woman named Charlotte Corday. On display at the exhibit, we have the knife Corday used to kill Marat. Jean-Paul Marat was not the only radical extremist calling for massive reform. There was also Maximilien Robespierre. A lawyer by trade, Robespierre made a name for himself in 1789 when he was elected deputy of the Third Estate in the Estates General. From there, he witnessed and advocated for the revolution. Unquestionably a radical, Robespierre took his stance on the idea that the rights of man applied to everyone, even the poor. Robespierre was also opposed to a European war on the death penalty, the latter of which would change over the course of the revolution. In 1792, rumors that the king was conspiring against France with other European powers swept throughout Europe. Robespierre's declaration that the aristocrats were taking counter-revolutionary measures was exactly what the people wanted to hear, and he became a voice for the masses. In September, the king was arrested and detained, and France was declared a republic. While the new government was being established, the convention debated over what would happen to the old king. Robespierre was adamant that the king be executed. On January 21st, 1793, Robespierre got his wish. The death of the king was the precursor for a 10-month period known as the Terror. Terror, headed by Robespierre, was a time of government-sanctioned terrorism. Anyone who did not agree with the ideas of the Committee of Public Safety was declared a counter-revolutionary and promptly executed. During this time, around 16,000 people were killed. While this was going down, France was fighting a war with several other European powers, including Austria and Britain. Much to everyone's surprise, France would win these wars thanks to a certain corporal named Napoleon Bonaparte. The French government would establish Napoleon as first consul, making him essentially an emperor. Thus, the revolution ended, right where it began. Approximately 40,000 people died in the revolution. And for what? Many things in France stayed the same after the revolution, most glaringly the return to a single person holding all of the political power. Even after the death of Napoleon, France returned to a monarchy. The other continuity in France's history was the state of the poor, who were still underrepresented, still mistreated, and still starving.
There was a time we killed the king. We tried to change the world too fast. Now we have got another king. He is no better than the last. This is the land that fought for liberty. Now when we fight for dread. Here is the thing about equality. Everyone's equal when they're dead.
Yet the French Revolution forever changed France by abolishing the feudal system and the privileges of nobles. More so than its American counterpart, the French Revolution drove home the ideas of equality and rights for all men, introducing the idea that all men are to be held equally to the same laws. Compare this to the Founding Fathers, many of whom were slave owners. Although the French Revolution did not reach the total government reform it was looking for, no one can deny the impact it had on the world. Another long-lasting effect of the French Revolution was the introduction of a new execution technique. Known as the egalitarian way of execution, this particular device led to a quick death and made no distinction between rich and poor, noble and peasant. It really was a remarkable device responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people. And we happen to have one here at the museum.